Liberal Fox News commentator Jessica Tarlo yet again smacked down the bad faith MAGA talking points of her Trump-supporting co-hosts about Vice President Harris and social media censorship. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we have a couple of clips to look at here of Jessica Tarlo, our favorite Fox News commentator, the voice of sanity on The Five, which is the Fox Propaganda Network's highest rated show. And basically, it's two sections. The first section is Tarlo basically, reminding people, bringing some sanity to this notion that this idea coming from MAGA that Vice President Harris is somehow scared to sit down for an interview. And then the next clip I'll show you deals with the notion of governments influencing social media companies to censor things. So we'll get into that. But first, let's talk about Vice President Kamala Harris. And we'll start with Jessica Tarlo.
So I do think doing the interviews is important. And anyone who is going to then criticize her doing this with Dana Bash isn't being an honest broker. No offense, Jesse. They would complain about anything. Dana Bash is a wonderful interviewer, and she was very good moderating the debate with Trump. He even said that she did a great job. So I think it's a good pick for that reason. Going out there with VP Walz, or soon to be VP Walz, I hope, lets you get to know the ticket in full. And if you were listening to Kamala talk about her experience at the convention in the Thursday night speech, can't really say she's afraid of anything. This doesn't seem like a woman who is cowering in the corner about this. She might be concerned about the kind of coverage that she's going to get of these things and the people who are, again, not being honest brokers and will be detractors no matter what she does. But I don't think it's because she's afraid. I do want the viewers, the voters, all of them to be able to see her and get to know her, because we know that this election will be decided by 200,000 people over a smattering of states, and some of them might feel really strongly about this. And there's an argument as well for doing a bunch of mini interviews instead of these really big ones where it's so high pressure, high stakes. But there is a very solid record, especially when it comes to Black voters, for Kamala Harris to be running on based on what they accomplished during the Biden-Harris administration, from over 2.5 million jobs for Black people, the lowest unemployment in American history for Black Americans, and also the smallest gap between white unemployment and Black unemployment, $16 billion for HBCUs, all of the high-speed internet access, et cetera, investing all this money into infrastructure to make sure that Black Americans have access to economic opportunities like the transportation to get there.
She's just so good at what she does. This recitation of the facts. I mean, one of the things you hear from Donald Trump and Trump surrogates, including Tim Scott, Republican senator from South Carolina, who was apparently somebody considered by Trump to be his vice presidential running mate, is this idea that Donald Trump has been better for Black Americans than any president. Trump himself says any president since Abraham Lincoln. Sometimes he says even better than President Lincoln. It's absolutely ridiculous. The fact of the matter is that those macroeconomic metrics are better under President Biden and Vice President Harris than they ever were under Donald Trump. Even the HBCUs things, the historically Black colleges and universities. So Trump will constantly tout, and so do Republicans, that, hey, the Trump administration funded HBCUs to a heretofore unprecedented level. But what that belies is the fact that Donald Trump tried to zero out federal funding for HBCUs. And it was because of congressional Democrats that he failed. So basically, whatever funding came out of the federal budget for HBCUs during the Trump years was in spite of Trump, not because of him. And even if you were to grade him on a curve there, which of course you never should, the fact of the matter is that HBCU funding is much higher under Biden-Harris than it ever was under Donald Trump. I also think it's really important for her to emphasize that the vice president, there's no evidence that she is intimidated for an interview, but the fact of the matter is she's winning this election as of this moment. She's beating Trump in the polls and the fundraising and the energy. Why risk a high-profile interview, which may be clipped or go viral, or which may be bad? I mean, people have bad interviews. It's possible. But if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And so what it comes down to is that so many in the media, particularly right-wing media, are upset by her pretty flawless momentum, quite frankly, and they're hoping that she'll do something which is high stakes and high pressure to disrupt the momentum. And right now, the vice president is refusing to take the bait because she's dictating the terms, certainly not the Republican Party. And I love that energy. Now, I've got another clip of Jessica Tarlo to play, but before I do, we got to provide some context. So Mark Zuckerberg, the chairman of Meta, right, which is the company behind Facebook. So he sent a letter to Jim Jordan, the Republican chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, on Monday, yesterday. And this is making the rounds virally. Quote, in 2021, senior officials from the Biden administration, including the White House, repeatedly pressured our teams for months to censor certain COVID-19 content, including humor and satire, and expressed a lot of frustration with our teams when we didn't agree, Zuckerberg said. In his letter to the committee, Zuckerberg said the pressure he felt in 2021 was, quote, wrong, and he came to, quote, regret that his company, the parent of Facebook and Instagram, was not more outspoken. Zuckerberg added that with the, quote, the benefit of hindsight and new information, end quote, there were decisions made in 2021 that wouldn't be made today. Quote, like I said to our teams at the time, I feel strongly that we should not compromise our content standards due to pressure from any administration in either direction, and we're ready to push back if something like this happens again, Zuckerberg said. A White House spokesperson responded to Zuckerberg's letter, saying the administration at the time was encouraging, quote, responsible actions to protect public health and safety, end quote. Quote, our position has been clear and consistent. We believe tech companies and other private actors should take into account the effects their actions have on the American people while making independent choices about the information they present, according to the spokesperson. Okay, so that's the context for this. Now, obviously, Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans are running with this, but in so doing, they're omitting some pretty crucial details about the relationship between Republican and Democratic administrations and social media companies. Thank God Jessica Tarlo is there to fact check them.
All right, Jessica, do you feel that the White House and the FBI did the right thing or the wrong thing with censorship?
Well, I think it's a little bit more complicated than the way that Mark Zuckerberg was explaining this or the way that your question implies. So all governments, Republican and Democrat, have relationships with social media companies and ask them to take down information that they feel is a risk to the public. And that happened before 2021. And I don't know why Mark Zuckerberg only wanted to single out the Biden-Harris administration, because there was COVID disinformation out there, like when Trump said it isn't airborne. It was airborne, for instance. I'm not going to get into the bleach hoax, Greg, but when Trump talked about disinfectant, well, we talked about bleach hoax a couple weeks ago, when he said disinfectant and some UV light treatment, that was something that people had to tell the public, no, actually don't do that, and ended up getting censored. And the timeline on the Hunter Biden story continues to be completely wonky. So that story happened under the Trump administration, right? It was taken down for 24 hours. Everybody knew about it. It went right back up. And there is no legitimate reason to think that this election would have swung in a different direction had everyone seen the contents of Hunter Biden's laptop. And the case of that has been proven by the fact that Jim Comer has been trying for years to be able to impeach them for something and hasn't been able to find it. And now even Republicans, like Axios is reporting today, have said that they really don't want to be forced to take a vote on impeachment before Biden goes out because there's nothing to this.
So again, she's just so damn good at what she does, because it's not just about the COVID-19 stuff. Republicans are taking this and running with it, including Donald Trump, suggesting that there was election interference. And they brought up the Hunter Biden laptop. So this was Donald Trump. Zuckerberg admits that the White House pushed to suppress Hunter Biden laptop story and much more. In other words, the 2020 presidential election was rigged. Fox News, New York Post, Representative Laurel Lee, House Judiciary Committee. Okay, so that's why Tarlo brings up the fact that when the Hunter Biden laptop story was censored, Donald Trump was president of the United States. The White House was a Republican White House. Joe Biden was merely the former vice president, the Democratic nominee running for president. He had no state power. Donald Trump was the most powerful man on earth at the time. And as Jessica Tarlo points out, certain links to the laptop story were suppressed because those links led to photos, pornographic photos of Hunter Biden. And at the time, it couldn't be verified if those were non-consensual photos, if they were, ill-gotten gains, if it violated the hacked materials policy. At the time, because it was an October surprise dropped by Rudy Giuliani in bad faith to swing the outcome of the election, people had ample, abundant reason to doubt the veracity of the leak, because it sounds so ridiculously far-fetched, especially when you consider the timing. And again, the fact that it was weaponized in bad faith by Republicans. And so for a 24-hour period, one day, certain links were censored, but the story could still be discussed. You weren't banned or suppressed or demonetized or in any way affected if you talked about the Hunter Biden laptop story, if you shared other links about the story that had nothing to do with the photos. Republicans tend to omit that. They want you to believe it was like a 2-week like blackout. Like nobody could link to anything. Nobody could talk about it. Twitter would just show up and kick down your door if you dare even say the 3 words Hunter Biden's laptop. It's just nonsense. Okay. It was a perfectly sound call given the information that Twitter had at the time. Okay. And it happened for 24 hours when Joe Biden wasn't president. Joe Biden made the request his campaign to take down certain things because, again, those were pornographic images of his son. He didn't bully anybody. He didn't have the power to bully anybody. He just made the request. Okay. And what's also important to remember is that when Donald Trump was president, not merely candidate, not a private citizen, not merely a former president, when he was the sitting president of the United States, the most powerful man on earth, not only did his administration and other sitting elected Republicans repeatedly reach out to Twitter to have certain things removed, Donald Trump used the power of the White House to pressure Twitter into deleting a tweet from a celebrity because that celebrity, get this, insulted him.
Ms. Naravoli, earlier you testified about a 2019 tweet that was about President Trump, and I think it was from Ms. Teagan. What was the tweet about?
Would you like me to give the direct quote?
Yeah.
Please excuse my language. This is a direct quote, but Chrissy Teigen referred to Donald Trump as a pussy-ass bitch.
Okay. Free speech. And what happened after Ms. Teagan posted her tweet? What did the White House do? What did the Trump White House do?
From my understanding, the White House reached out to ask that this tweet be removed. It was my team's job. This fell underneath the policy for abusive behaviors, and we evaluated underneath our insults policy. At that time, up to 3 insults were allowed, and so it was our job to determine how many insults were included within that phrase.
So the Trump White House reached out, not an agency, but the White House reached out and requested that you remove the tweet?
From my understanding, yes.
Okay.
So the Trump White House reached out to get Twitter to delete a tweet from Chrissy Teigen, a celebrity, John Legend's wife, because she referred to Donald Trump by that particular phrase, right? That's the sort of thing that Republicans tend to ignore. And they shouldn't if they're really principled actors who believe that free speech is something that no one should violate. But when their guy does it, when their team does it, as they often do, they just don't care. And so, again, the hypocrisy is staggering. And I think Jessica Tarlo is right to point out that, again, there's no compelling evidence that the Hunter Biden story would have had any material impact on the 2020 election, nor should it, given that Hunter Biden and Joe Biden are famously 2 different people. And Joe Biden was the candidate and Hunter Biden was not. And Hunter Biden was an adult at the time of all of his misbehavior. Set all that aside, I think she's also right to point out the fact that every administration in the time of social media, Republican and Democrat, including the Trump administration, has relationships with social media companies that are in national security interests, and those relationships aren't going anywhere. Now, should they be careful? Of course. Should there be scrutiny? Of course. But to pretend that governments don't and shouldn't, no matter who's in charge, engage with social media companies is ridiculous. And we know that Donald Trump did indeed do that when he was the president of the United States for very petty personal reasons that are infinitely less defensible than the Biden administration with COVID-19 or the Biden campaign requesting that nude photos of the president's son, or the candidate's son in that case, be taken down. So, per usual, Democrats have a much better defense, have a much better basis for doing what they do than hypocritical Republicans. And thank God Jessica Tarlo is there to point all of that out. And in the meantime, you let me know what you think in the comments.